Number 10. Guardian and Captain America. Jim Harper was a rookie cop on the Metropolis police force. He was put on duty in a rough area, and not a day would go by where the civilians in the area wouldn't pelt him with rotten food. One day he was ambushed by hoodlums, and I guess something just broke in his brain. He went to a costume store, bought a costume, and became a vigilante in addition to being a cop. What makes him similar to Captain America is his trademark shield, which he uses to defend himself and attack his enemies. Other than that, he's not really that similar to Captain America, other than the fact that both characters were created by Jack Kirby and Joe Simon, but I figured it was worth mentioning and putting at the bottom of the list. Number 9. Atomic Skull and Ghost Rider. There have been a couple Atomic Skulls over the years in DC Comics, but the one we're going to talk about today is the Joseph Martin version, who first appeared in 1991 and gives off massive Ghost Rider vibes. Sure, they have very different origins, with Atomic Skull being a supervillain who was the victim of an accident at Star Labs, which gave him his look as well as energy projection abilities, and Ghost Rider is a motorcycle stunt driver who is possessed by a demon and uses his hellfire powers to punish evildoers. But the look is too similar to ignore. The flaming skull look is so quintessentially Ghost Rider that seeing it on anyone else feels a bit copycat. As if that wasn't bad enough, in other appearances the Atomic Skull even wears a leather motorcycle jacket, making the two almost indistinguishable, even if it is only on a visual level. Number 8. Black Racer and the Silver Surfer. Jack Kirby is responsible for the creation of so many comic characters, one of which is the Silver Surfer. He was an alien named Norrin Rad, whose planet was about to be eaten by Galactus. He managed to convince Galactus to spare his planet if he would become the Herald of Galactus. He was granted cosmic powers and became the Silver Surfer, who traveled the galaxy looking for planets that his master could eat while riding around on his surfboard. A creation that Kirby created a few years later for DC Comics bears a few similarities. Vietnam vet Willie Walker was paralyzed in combat and was contacted by the Source, who is an aspect of the Presence, one of the energies that apparently created the universe in DC Comics. The Source made Willie the physical manifestation of Death, the Black Racer, who flies around on a pair of cosmically charged skis collecting souls. Number 7. Red Hood and the Winter Soldier. Considering how much crap people give Batman for bringing a child along while he fights crime, people tend to forget that Captain America literally made a child fight in World War II as his sidekick. After Captain America was unfrozen from the ice in Avengers number 4, we learned that his sidekick had perished in the war after being blown up on a mission, and that Cap was now alone. This was maintained for over 40 years until the Out of Time arc in 2005, when Captain America had to go up against a highly trained assassin who seemed to know everything about his past, the Winter Soldier. The Winter Soldier of course turned out to be Bucky, who had survived the explosion and was brainwashed into becoming a deadly assassin. It was a mind-blowing arc for fans of the classic Cap stories and had long-lasting effects on the continuity, with Bucky eventually becoming a hero again and having his story adapted for the MCU. A few months later, Batman went through a similar ordeal. His second Robin, Jason Todd, had died in an explosion set by the Joker in the 80s and was considered one of the few permanent comic book deaths along with Uncle Ben. Although the idea of a villainous Jason was teased in 2003 in the Hush story, this turned out to be an elaborate ruse by Clayface, although this was later retconned so that Jason's real resurrection would feel more set up. In the Under the Red Hood arc, Batman had to go up against a highly trained and murderous vigilante who seemed to know everything about his past, the Red Hood. Red Hood of course turned out to be Jason, who had been brought back to life when Superboy Prime punched reality so hard that it broke. It was a mind-blowing arc for fans of the second Robin and had long-lasting effects on the continuity, with Jason eventually becoming a hero again and having his story adapted for the beloved animated film. These happened so close to each other that it's hard to say if this is a true knockoff, but either way, Marvel beat DC to the punch by a couple of months. Number 6. Bumblebee and the Wasp. First appearing all the way back in Tales to Astonish number 44 in 1963, Janet Van Dyne is the partner of Ant-Man, who was exposed to his Pym particles, which caused her biology to be altered so that she could shrink. She also has synthetic wings that allow her to fly. She used these tools and abilities to become one of the founding Avengers. She is very similar to the DC hero Bumblebee, who debuted years later in 1976 Teen Titans number 45. Bumblebee was a scientist who was dating one of the Titans, Herald, and developed her persona so she could stage an attack on the team that her boyfriend could defuse, making him look good in front of the team. When the Titans eventually discovered the truth, they were so impressed with her abilities that she was offered a spot on the team. Like the Wasp, her supersuit allows her to fly and also allows her to shrink in size. However, the shrinking has led to her developing a heart condition, which she manages with medication created by Dr. Niles Calder. She is a consistent member of both the Teen Titans and Doom Patrol, but hasn't had the mainstream popularity of the Marvel character who inspired her.
Number 5. Nighthawk. In 1996, Marvel created a whole team of villains who were direct knockoffs of DC Comics' Justice League with the Squadron Sinister. This team was created by the Grand Master after coming into contact with a team called the Squadron Supreme, who came from a different universe. The Squadron Supreme had direct Marvel versions of heroes like Superman with Hyperion, Wonder Woman with Power Princess, and among others, Batman with Nighthawk, aka Kyle Richmond. Kyle Richmond is a multi-billionaire whose riches were built through his father's criminal enterprises, leading him to choose to use the money for good instead of evil. He's got a cape, he has pointy ears, he's animal themed, and no matter which version we are talking about, the character is incredibly brooding and runs around at night. There are at least 5 well-known versions of Kyle Richmond in the Marvel Universe. The Squadron Sinister one, who eventually joins the Defenders, the Earth 712 Squadron Supreme version, the Earth 31916 Kyle Richmond, who was a black man whose parents were taken out by white supremacists, leading him to become an anti-racism vigilante, the Iron Man-like Ultimate Universe Kyle Richmond, and the Kyle Richmond of Earth TRN 852, which is not a regular part of the multiverse, but a magical creation of the villain Mephisto, where the Avengers never existed. Also, you have to call me Nighthawk. I just want to say that. Number 4. Big Daddy. Another creation of Mark Miller, not Frank Miller. Big Daddy appeared in the Kick-Ass comics and the movies, and speaking of the movies, in them, he looks like an exact replica of Batman, but he acts a lot more like the Punisher, meaning he is heavily armed and not afraid to use those arms at all. That's also the case in the comics, but here he has a completely different costume that does not reflect Batman. But he is still a knockoff of Batman for one big reason: Hit Girl. Hit Girl is actually Big Daddy's daughter, who he trained to become an incredibly capable assassin and sidekick, and this is a lot like Batman and Robin. Initially, we are led to believe that Big Daddy did this for revenge against a mob boss who caused the passing of his wife, but over time, we learn that was actually all a lie. His wife was very much alive, and he practically took his daughter and went off on the run, training her and going on missions with her, all to give her an exciting life, funding the whole thing by selling comic books and looting criminals. It's a really interesting idea of taking someone and manipulating and turning them into a crime-fighting sidekick, which is arguably something Batman does all the time. Number 3. Moon Knight. Originally, Marvel's Moon Knight did start as a Batman takeoff in the panels of Werewolf by Night, but good golly, he has become so much more, and I think I can speak for almost everyone when I say, thank the Lord he has. But since this is a Batman knockoff list, let's talk about what these two characters share. They both run around in the night as Knights of the Night, and that was fun to say. Both of these characters are very wealthy, and they use that wealth to fund their crime-fighting ways. They both wear capes, utilize themed tools, and they're both, on the surface, messed up psychologically, and that's kind of where the similarities stop. Talking about psychology, Moon Knight is way more distorted than the Caped Crusader. Almost all of his stories revolve around him struggling with his sanity and multiple personalities, and the rest of the superheroes know how insane he is. And then there's his backstory. Moon Knight was a mercenary who, at the end of his mortal coil, was chosen by an Egyptian god to be its avatar, which granted him super strength, durability, stamina, self-sustenance, immortality, and divine mystical empowerment. I think on the surface, it's easy to draw parallels between Moon Knight and the Dark Knight, but on the surface only. Number 2. Midnighter. Hailing from the Wildstorm universe, which is now under the DC's purview, Midnighter is one of the founding members of the Authority, which is a team just like the Justice League yet again, only I think I find this team to be less of a parody and more of a legit thing of their own. The Authority are actually really cool, and I'm super pumped that we will be getting them in the DCEU. Midnighter goes hand in hand with his partner and husband, Apollo, and together they are very clear nods to Batman and Superman. Now, obviously, in order for them to work as their own heroes, things have to differ a little bit. For Midnighter, while he dresses in all black, is incredibly stealthy, is an unmatched hand-to-hand fighter, and utilizes tech, he is incredibly violent, which is a huge no-no for Batman. I'm talking almost Punisher levels of violence. He also has actual superpowers. His main one is battle precognition, which allows him to predict how a situation will happen before it starts, running through a given situation millions of times in his mind before the first move is even made. All of his major senses are incredibly enhanced as well, and thanks to a series of crazy implants, he has super strength, speed, durability, reflexes, control over his pain receptors, environmental adaptation, and an insanely good healing factor. And in at number 1 is Darkwing Duck. He is the terror that flaps in the night. He is the awkward goodbye that lasts way too long. He is Darkwing Duck. Darkwing Duck, especially in the comics, is like the Tim Burton Batman movies fused together with Donald Duck. And then, to keep things not entirely a ripoff, there are dashes of Pulp comics and Golden Age heroes like Dick Tracy and the Shadow, the Sandman, Doc Savage, the Green Hornet, the Flash, the Lone Ranger, and even Zorro. The fictional city of St. Canard is a direct parody of Gotham City, but what makes the whole thing just so much better is the whole screwball mentality of Disney's Talking Ducks. The show ran for 3 seasons from 1991 to 1992 and tells the adventures of Darkwing Duck, aided by his sidekick and pilot Launchpad McQuack. In his secret identity of Drake Mallard, which is a direct parody of Kent Allard, the alter ego of the Shadow, he lives in an unassuming suburban house with his adopted daughter Gosselin, with his whole struggle being to balance his ego against his desire to be a good father to Gosselin and to help do good in St. Canard City, which is a parody of Gotham City, like I already said. Yes, it is a parody, so it's openly being like, we're ripping off Batman, but it's for comedy, which makes it totally okay.
Number 10, Miles Morales. In Marvel's infamous Ultimate Universe, when the original Spider-Man, Peter Parker, was killed by his universe's Sinister Six, the entire city of New York mourned the young hero, with practically half the city showing up to his funeral. Even though they had called him a menace for most of his short career, he was finally embraced as a hero and treated with the respect he deserved by both the city and the heroes who had looked down on him due to his age. So, when a new Spider-Man showed up in Ultimate Fallout number 4, both the villains and the heroes he came across were kinda weirded out and took the time to tell him that dressing as the recently dead hero was in terrible taste. Miles Morales of course became a fan favorite character and was eventually transferred to the main 616 Marvel universe, but it's interesting that until he was able to prove himself in story, many of the other characters thought of him as a disrespectful knockoff. Of course, now he is considered by characters and fans alike more as an official franchisee, having the approval of the original Spider-Man. Number 9, Scorpion. When J. Jonah Jameson hired a private investigator named Mac Gargan to follow Peter Parker to find out how he got such incredible photos of Spider-Man, Peter was able to easily avoid him thanks to his spider sense. Frustrated at how Spider-Man was beginning to be embraced by the public, JJ decided to create a bug-themed superperson of his own. He hired a scientist who specialized in mutating animals and paid Gargan $10,000 to undergo experiments that would give him scorpion powers. He also had a scorpion-themed costume made up, complete with a dangerous tail for Mac to wear, and then he sent him after Spider-Man. The experiment unfortunately drove Mac insane, and he became a supervillain, but the fact that he was created to essentially be a Jameson-approved version of the webbed wall crawler is an interesting bit of backstory. Number 8. Deadpool. Deadpool is actually more of a Deathstroke ripoff than he is a Spider-Man one. Deathstroke is a super deadly assassin named Slade Wilson who uses a combination of firearms and swords to defeat his enemies, and Deadpool is a super deadly assassin named Wade Wilson who uses a combination of firearms and swords to defeat his enemies. Sure, Deadpool is quippy in a way that's not dissimilar to the webbed wall crawler, but the aspect we're focusing on is his look. Deadpool wears a distinctive red bodysuit with white eyes and honestly doesn't look that much like Spider-Man. However, it is enough of a passing resemblance that it has become a running gag in the comics for characters to mistake Deadpool for Spidey. This is usually done to be a blow to Deadpool's confidence and sense of identity, and even more often as a joke where Deadpool does something absolutely horrible, inadvertently getting the crime pinned on Spider-Man, further damaging his notoriously constantly tarnished reputation. Okay, that's the last of the characters who ever cross paths with Spider-Man. Let's move on to the characters that borrow from the character a bit more liberally, with most of them copying either his look, his powers, his bug theme, or the revolutionary teenage Superman aspect that Spider-Man started. Number 7. Sailor Moon. Before Spider-Man, the common thought process among writers was that teenagers could not be superheroes, only sidekicks. That's part of what made Spider-Man so revolutionary, as in the early comics we got to see him balancing his high school life with the responsibilities of being a hero. It was such an iconic element that even though Spider-Man was actually only in high school for the first 28 issues of his series, he is still mostly thought of as a teenage superhero. This element was used for lots of heroes across different media, but let's go with Sailor Moon, so we can dip our toes in the manga world for a bit. Usagi Tsukino was a regular high school girl before she met a talking black cat named Luna, who told her that she was really one of the Sailor Senshi of love and justice, Sailor Moon. She spends a lot of her run having to balance the typical issues of teenagehood, like school and romance, with saving the world from evil beings. Not one of the most obvious imitators of old Webhead, but it's a fun example of him having an influence beyond just a Western audience. Number 6. Batman Beyond. When the Batman animated series came to an end, its creators followed it up with another banger called The New Batman Adventures, which continued the adventures of the great Kevin Conroy's Batman while introducing the other members of the Bat family. It was extremely well received, but the network made the surprising choice to cancel it after one season. Their reasoning was that shows featuring teenagers, such as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, were doing really well, and they wanted a new Batman show featuring a teenage Batman to try and capture some of that audience. Not wanting to mess with their established continuity, the producers pitched the idea of the series taking place in the future, with Bruce Wayne passing down the mantle. They got the green light from the network, but none of the writers really wanted to do the show until they realized that it would allow them to, quote, do all that Spider-Man stuff, with the tortured hero trying to balance their life as a superhero with their personal and school life. This idea got them excited, and the resulting show, featuring Terry McGinnis becoming the new Dark Knight, was a worthy and iconic addition to the Batman mythos, receiving 3 full seasons as well as a feature film before eventually being incorporated into the comic books. Due to the talents of all those involved, Batman Beyond is able to stand on his own 2 feet as a hero, but it's interesting that it was the influence not of the original Batman, but of Spider-Man that got the writers started. Number 5. Rorschach. Rorschach is one of the most iconic characters appearing in Alan Moore's masterpiece Watchmen. He is a hard-boiled detective who wears a mask that completely obscures his face. He is very similar to The Question, who is a hard-boiled detective who dresses very similar to Rorschach and who wears a mask that makes him appear to have no face. The two are very much cut from the same cloth, and that is intentional. Watchmen was originally supposed to feature characters from the Charlton Comics universe that DC had purchased in 1985, and was going to feature characters like The Question, Captain Atom, and Blue Beetle. When DC found out that Alan Moore was planning on killing off The Question at the end of the book, they stepped in, not wanting to lose access to a series of characters they had just spent millions of dollars buying. They asked him to create new characters that would be reminiscent of the characters that he had planned to use, with Captain Atom becoming Dr. Manhattan, Blue Beetle becoming Night Owl, and The Question becoming Rorschach. So, Rorschach and the other Watchmen are all knockoffs of other characters, but their company approved knockoffs, so no one got sued. Number 4. Spider-Man. Here's where things start getting wild on this list. Spider-Man is probably the most beloved superhero in Marvel Comics. With his ability to do whatever a spider can, and his trademark look, he has become a pop culture icon all over the world. But what is the source of his knockoffery? Well, Stan Lee has said over the years that one of the characters that inspired Spidey was the pulp hero known as the Spider. This may have been the source of the name, but other than that, the characters aren't very similar. The Spider is a brutal and murderous vigilante whose primary disguise is to wear a mask, a fedora, and a fake hump. When the character appeared in film serials, he got a more webbed look, but this isn't really enough for me to start throwing around words like knockoff. However, where did Spider-Man get his look? Well, take a look at this Halloween costume from the now defunct Ben Cooper Costume Company. Between the webbing, the spider emblem, and the general vibe of it, it's a bit too close for comfort. And what is that written on his head? Spider-Man? These costumes first appeared in 1954 and were relatively popular costumes for kids to buy. Spider-Man didn't show up in the comics until 1962, but is there any evidence that this costume was the inspiration for Spidey? Well, most of the Halloween costumes you saw in New York in the 50s were Ben Cooper's, and their head office and Marvel's were only 10 miles away, so it is likely that they would have seen the costume at some point, but that's not exactly hard evidence. How about this? Although Stan Lee and Steve Ditko are credited as the creators of Spider-Man, the initial design work was done by Jack Kirby. Now Kirby did a lot of work for a lot of people, having made art and designs for Marvel, DC, and Ben Cooper Inc. Number 3. The Green Lantern Corps. When Green Lantern was reinvented for the Silver Age in 1959, we were introduced to a completely different mythology than the Alan Scott version that had been around in the Golden Age. In the new version, Hal Jordan was a member of the Green Lantern Corps, an intergalactic police force whose members were deemed worthy of wielding a Green Lantern ring, which would translate for them as well as creating constructs they could use to fight their enemies. This is very similar to the Galactic Patrol, a group featured in the science fiction book series known as the Lensmen, which were published from 1948 to 1954. The Galactic Patrol are a group of space cops, or lensmen, whose members are deemed worthy of wielding a wrist-mounted device called the lens. The lens grants the wielder the ability to translate alien language and a variety of other mental abilities. DC editorial denied any connection between the two groups, but creators who have worked on the Green Lantern series since then have leaned into it, creating characters that are direct references to the characters from the Lensman books, such as the Green Lantern Corps members Aricia and Adore. Number 2. Superman. Doc Savage, the Man of Bronze, first appeared in Doc Savage Magazine number 1 in 1933, 5 whole years before Superman. Doc Savage's story is that his father assembled a group of scientists who were all experts in their fields to train his son almost from birth to make him a perfect human specimen who is at peak human condition and is a master martial artist and scientist, physician, inventor, explorer, and detective. He was raised in the jungle where he received a really intense tan, earning him the nickname the Man of Bronze. After his father was killed, he decided to devote himself to fighting crime, traveling the world and battling criminals. He is extremely rich and has a base in the Arctic, which he calls the Fortress of Solitude. He's aided by a team of friends known as the Fabulous Five, who are all experts in their scientific fields, but of course not as expert as Doc Savage is. In his third appearance in 1933, Quest of the Spider, he is referred to as Superman by one of the Fabulous Five. As if that weren't enough, Doc Savage's first name is Clark. Number 1. Batman. Batman takes a lot of inspiration from Zorro with the whole masked hero in black who's really a wealthy playboy, but the character wears those inspirations on his sleeve, having been watching a Zorro movie before his parents were shot. So I'm going to focus more on the influence of the Shadow. The pulp hero known as the Shadow is a man who has traveled the world and learned how to cloud men's minds and become invisible, hiding in the shadows to attack criminals. He has taken over the life of a wealthy playboy named Lamont Cranston, whose identity he uses to fund his exploits and gather intel from his friend, the police commissioner. If this sounds kinda Batman-y to you, then you would be right, as the Shadow was a major influence on Batman's modus operandi. In fact, the Shadow story Partners of Peril was lifted almost word for word by Bob Kane when he wrote the first Batman story featured in Detective Comics number 27. Both feature the hero investigating the murders of a group of businessmen who own a chemical syndicate together. Both feature the hero getting trapped under a glass dome that fills with gas that they then plug with a handkerchief. So Batman passed the point of inspiration and fell into the grounds of outright plagiarism right out the gate, which is frankly typical Bob Kane behavior.
And at number 10 is Popclaw. The boys' television show and the comics that inspired it are filled with characters that are meant to stand in for more well-known and beloved superheroes in an effort to tell a story about what superpowered beings might be like in the real world. Homelander is obviously meant to be Superman. The Deep is clearly a play on Aquaman, and Queen Maeve is very much Wonder Woman. One of the more minor characters to appear in both the comics and the TV show is Popclaw. Popclaw is a woman whose name is rather self-explanatory. She has claws that pop out of her arms, with which she attacks her enemies. She's less one-to-one with Wolverine than other characters in the franchise are with their heroes that inspired them, but the influence is clearly there in aesthetic if nothing else. More comic-savvy fans will probably say she is more similar to X-23, and the creator of the character, Gareth Ennis, has said that she is actually inspired more by Scandal Savage, but for the more casual viewer of the TV show, the first thought that will pop in their mind when they see Popclaw and her powers will be, oh, it's Wolverine. So for that reason, she will get the number 10 slot on this list. But in at number 9 is Seahawk. This character from Image Comics is really Mark Barrows, who was hunting for underwater artifacts with his family when one of the artifacts blew up, resulting in his father's death, but him and his brother being granted superpowers and becoming the heroes Seahawk and Cold Snap. He would go on to join the superhero team the Brigade, and overall isn't that much of a Wolverine knockoff. However, the fact that one of the powers granted to him was accelerated healing, and the fact that his look is kinda Logan-esque with the fangs and the pointy-eared mask makes me think that Wolverine was at least an influence on the character, and makes me comfortable putting him on the low end of this list. Number 8. Warblade. Warblade is an often forgot character that was created by Jim Lee and Brandon Choi for the DC Comics Wildstorm universe. Similar to what happened with Wolverine, Warblade was kidnapped and brainwashed so that he would be a member of an elite strike team known as the SHOC before breaking free of their control and joining a super team known as the Wildcats. Unlike Wolverine, he is not human and instead a Karen, an alien race who can shapeshift into a mercury-like substance. He can use this metal morphing ability to create claws, which he of course uses to attack his enemies. He is also a world-class martial artist with ties to Japan, but though he is clearly inspired by Wolverine, he is different enough to rank pretty low on this list as well. Number 7. Lobo. Lobo is a really interesting character as he was originally created as a joke. He was meant to be a parody of the gritty anti-heroes who were becoming so popular in the 90s by being a ridiculously buff space bounty hunter who would say goofy tough stuff and was just meant to be a big old goofy joke. One of the characters who was a main source of inspiration, according to one of its creators, Roger Slipher, was Wolverine, with his tendency to drink beer, constantly talk about how edgy and tough he was, and always talking about how he was the best there is at what he does. And what he does isn't very nice. Lobo also has a powerful healing factor, but that's neither here nor there. What the creators at DC Comics didn't anticipate was that the readers wouldn't take the character as a joke and would genuinely love the main man. Not once to look a gift horse in the mouth, DC quickly expanded the character to give him his own identity and gave him his own series of books. Number 6. Wildchild. First appearing in Alpha Flight number 1, Wildchild was created by John Byrne to be little more than a Wolverine-like character. Like Wolverine and Sabretooth, who isn't on this list as he was created to be a foil to Wolverine as opposed to a copy, Kyle Gibney has an animalistic nature as well as a healing factor and razor-sharp claws. Due to his freakish appearance, he was shunned by humanity until he was found by Department H, who made him a member of the Alpha Flight training program, Gamma Flight. When Alpha Flight had its funding pulled by the government and went independent, members of Beta and Gamma Flight were recruited by the evil Jerome Jackson to be members of the evil Omega Flight, who tried to defeat Alpha on 2 separate occasions in John Byrne's original run on the comics. When John Byrne left the book to work on the Incredible Hulk series, Wildchild was just a Wolverine-esque villain who had never really been an issue for the Alphas to defeat, but he was further developed by subsequent writers to be a more unique character, eventually joining the hero team and becoming Weapon Omega and dating fellow teammate Aurora. His morality has shifted quite a bit over the years, with him being a member of the Hellions, X-Factor, Weapon X, and becoming a good foil for Wolverine to fight rather than a throwaway copy he was originally intended to be.
Number 5. Allison Hargreaves. Allison Hargreaves is maybe one of the most original feeling ripoffs that I've listed here in terms of, individual characters we're talking about, but still, she does seem to take a lot of inspiration from one very prominent X-Men character, Jean Grey. As a child, I would say Allison especially resembles Jean in the comics, with her hair appearing red as opposed to her standard purple that we're used to seeing her have when she's an adult. And with purple hair, you could use that to link her to another famous telepathic or psionic character, Psylocke, aka Betsy Braddock, and also aka Quanon, depending on what we're talking about, and even if they're combined, that's a whole thing. Sometimes separate, sometimes tragically combined, I would say. Allison Hargreaves is known by the codename of Rumor. This is because she can use her powers to influence the will of others by using the phrase, "I heard a rumor." While Jean and Psylocke don't typically use their powers in this way, Jean is definitely capable of controlling people and influencing them in their minds using her own abilities, and I would also say so is Psylocke to perhaps a lesser extent, but still is a thing that she could do. Although her psionic abilities tend to be more used in direct combat, where she can deal mental damage using psi weapons, because that's what Psylocke likes to do. Number 4. Next Men. The Next Men definitely were inspired by the X-Men. There's no doubt about that in my mind at all. They were a creation of John Byrne for Dark Horse Comics, and of course John Byrne is also a writer who has a history of, being tied to the X-Men as well. These superpowered beings were more anti-heroes than straight up heroes who attempt to rescue a world that they really don't know a lot about, having been raised in a virtual reality world inside a lab. In other words, they kind of, to me, share some similarities to our friend Phantom X. The Next Men also have some other interesting elements when it comes to how they were presented in contrast to the X-Men. Byrne tried to ground them and their abilities a little bit more in reality by making pretty much every superpower that they have come with some kind of quirk or some kind of setback in some way, trying to acknowledge some of the real world consequences one might actually have to deal with physically or mentally as a result of having superpowers. Because usually when you have superpowers, it's like you have super strength and it's not a problem for your body, but then there are other characters that have super strength in other worlds where it's like, okay, they're super strong, but they're not super durable, which seems like how powers would probably go, and then you just mess yourself up by using your super strength. Number 3. Nathan. Nathan of the Next Men is definitely a ripoff of Cyclops, but something that I think is actually really interesting is he isn't a direct one-for-one copy. His powers are actually, in a way, kind of like the opposite of Scott's, or at least an alternative, if not, the direct opposite to Scott's powers. They're not really the direct opposite, but they work in a very different way, but something that kind of feels like the opposite. Let me explain. While Nathan can also be spotted wearing shades with even a similar hairstyle, I'd say to Scott's, his powers allow him to see everything extremely well. Instead of expelling optic blasts from his eyes are more like great receptors for light, meaning that he can see things most people can't. Nathan, like Scott though, is also known for being the team leader of the Next Men, so yeah, they definitely are meant to be kind of like parallels of each other, but I do like that Byrne decided to give us a very different kind of eye-related mutation here. Also, this power set kind of makes me think of Eye-Boy, who I don't think was created yet when Next Men first appeared. I'm pretty sure they appeared in the 90s or the 80s. Eye-Boy didn't come out until the 2000s, so it is possible that Nathan, who was definitely inspired by Psyche, may have also influenced the creation of other X-Men like Eye-Boy, who appeared over at Marvel after Nathan's first appearance in Next Men over at Dark Horse, which is pretty neat actually. Number 2. G-Men. Before we even get X-Men in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we're probably likely going to get X-Men copycats in the streaming series universe based off of Garth Ennis's The Boys. The G-Men are a villainous team inspired by the X-Men, who are another group of kind of Vought-endorsed heroes. At least I think they're Vought-endorsed. I haven't read all of The Boys, so I apologize if I'm incorrect about that one. And unsurprisingly, it's also believed that they'll be linked to Payback when they arrive in the live-action series of its own universe. Payback, for those who may not be aware, are basically The Boys' version of Marvel's Avengers in the comics, with their leader being a parody-inspired version of Captain America there, known as Soldier Boy, although they kind of went a different way with it a little bit in the live-action series. G-Men are led by John Godolkin, whose team were all kidnapped when they were younger and raised and trained by him in his own school. The name G-Men likely comes from his last name, Godolkin, but can also be a slang term used with negative connotation to indicate those working for the government. G-Men, government men. So that name kind of has a double meaning, and also it just basically means, yeah, they're not very good people. Surprise, surprise. Number 1, John Godolkin. If you thought Professor X was bad, wait till you meet his boys equivalent, which of course is way worse. The founder of the G-Men and its other spin-off teams is John Godolkin. In The Boys, Godolkin has done a lot of awful things to his superpowered students. Many of them I cannot even mention on YouTube because they're just that bad and kind of goes against TOS. Unlike Charles Xavier though, Godolkin has no powers to speak of, being more similar to Niles Calder, I would say, from DC in that regard, who is in essence the head of their version of an off-kilter outcast hero team known as the Doom Patrol. Doom Patrol School, in fact, is not a ripoff of the X-Men, if you're wondering why I didn't list them here, as their existence actually predates the X-Men by a few months in terms of the comic's release. Godolkin ended up capturing his team members as opposed to offering them a place at his school, taking them kinda against their will. He specifically, however, seeks out runaways and orphans, which, to be honest, so kind of does Charles. So, although some of Xavier's students do admittedly come from happy, healthy families that simply basically chose to admit their children to his school to be trained in the use of their powers. So I would say, you know, that could be a difference.
But in at number 10 is Darkwing. Starting off this list with an extremely short-lived, obvious, and purposely on-the-nose knockoff of the Dark Knight is Darkwing from the Image Comics Invincible series. When we kick off that story, the world is defended by the Guardians of the Globe, an elite group of heroes who were very obviously based on the Justice League of America. The team was composed of the Immortal, who was similar to but inherently different than Superman, Red Rush, who was based on the Flash, Aquarius, who was based on Aquaman, Martian Man based on Martian Manhunter, the Green Ghost based on Green Lantern, and the two financiers of the team, War Woman based on Wonder Woman, and of course, Darkwing. Obviously, being one of the members who funded the team, Darkwing was incredibly wealthy. He was all dark and brooding, he wore a cape, he was in peak human condition, he relied on tech and his hand-to-hand combat skills, and he had cool one-liners. And none of that saved him from his very sudden sticky end. Number 9. Captain Sunshine. Captain Sunshine of the long-running Venture Bros animation series, while absolutely superpowered and brightly dressed, is such an obvious parody of Batman, and even more specifically, Batman Beyond. The current Captain Sunshine, Chuck Scarsdale, was actually the former sidekick called Wonder Boy of the original hero Desmond, who is now hella old and essentially acts as the Alfred to Chuck. This is extremely similar to how in Batman Beyond, Bruce Wayne becomes the mentor and guy in the chair to Terry McGinnis, who is the new Batman. But Venture Bros goes beyond all the other Batman knockoffs on this list by getting the actual voice of Batman, the late Kevin Conroy, to be the voice of Captain Sunshine. Actually, side note, if we're talking about Batman ripoffs voiced by Batmen, Adam West also did the voice of Catman on The Fairly Odd Parents, so that's a little fun fact for you. And moving on to number 8, Rorschach. Now look, there is indeed another Watchman that embodies Batman in some much less subtle ways. In fact, almost all the characters from Watchmen are a parody of another hero or villain from comic books in some way or form. The whole Watchmen story was made to deconstruct and satirize the idea of superheroes and to make a political commentary. Now while Rorschach himself was very obviously modeled after the Question, he is a much more gritty and brutal character who lives by such an extreme sense of justice that it makes me and a lot of other people believe that Rorschach's character is likely what would happen to Batman if he was real or if he just went a little bit off the deep end. He is a hero that you root for, but you almost feel as though you shouldn't because of his anarchist ways, and while that is not exactly Batman, the grizzled ordinary man with a dark past who is a masked detective who sneaks into crime scenes and beats criminals to a pulp in the middle of the night, that's got Batman written all over it. Number 7. Night Owl. With that said about Rorschach, we might as well talk about the much more obvious knockoff of Batman from the Watchmen comics, Night Owl. Just looking at Night Owl, you know he is meant to inspire the idea of Batman. Also, if you know DC Comics well enough, you probably know about Earth 3's Batman, aka Owlman or Thomas Wayne Jr., and the physical similarities there are obviously even more apparent. But Night Owl is actually intended to be a parallel of Blue Beetle, which may surprise you, but it's because of the inherited nature of the Night Owl name, the same way there have been multiple Blue Beetles. But Dan Drayberg is wealthy thanks to his inheritance, he's a regular guy, he has an underground lair, he's incredibly intelligent, creating owl-themed vehicles. The source of his power is almost entirely reliant on his technology, and his fighting style focuses more on incapacitation over the violence used by some other heroes. But man, he is pretty damn mopey like all the time, which does kind of line up with Batman, but never this much. Number 6. Nemesis. Mark Miller, not to be confused with Frank Miller, which is something I do all the time, created Nemesis with the whole idea of what would happen if you took Batman but did everything completely different. Essentially, it asks what happens if Bruce Wayne used his wealth and resources to become a villain instead of a a hero. The smartest man in the world, as the only supervillain in the world, with vendetta against police in all countries and a revenge for a lost childhood. Now, we gotta say it doesn't quite hit the mark you might think. It's not exactly the greatest comic book. It kinda relies on shock factor and overabundance of the overtop violence just for the sake of it, and of course the opposition to the character of Batman, but that makes Nemesis perfect for this list. He wears all white, has a super crazy cool cape, and relies on his tools, subtlety, and his massive intellect. I almost wish it was better, but unfortunately centering the comic around an evil, cocky Batman who isn't really that likable, it didn't work out too well.
Number 5. Aquaman and Namor the Submariner. Namor the Submariner is another character who appeared in a comic published by Timely Comics, the company that would eventually become Marvel, in a comic called Motion Picture Funnies Weekly. He is the son of a normal human and Atlantean royalty, making him the heir to the Atlantean throne. He is amphibious, being able to survive on both land and water, and has super strength and speed, being able to swim at speeds up to 345 miles per hour. He is also able to use telepathy to communicate with and control marine life. A few years later, in 1956's Adventure Comics number 229, we were introduced to Arthur Curry, also known as Aquaman. His father was a regular human and his mother was a member of Atlantean royalty named Atlanta, making him the heir to the throne of Atlantis. Like Namor, he is amphibious and has super strength and durability, as well as his most well-known ability, the ability to telepathically communicate with and control marine life. Unlike Namor, he doesn't have little ankle wings that allow him to fly around. Aquaman is more well known by the general public due to years of appearing in cartoons where he was a less than dignified hero, often coming across as extremely silly. But when making fun of Aquaman, it's important to remember that Namor was stupid first. Number 4. Red Tool and Deadpool. Marvel's Wade Wilson, aka Deadpool, was infamously based off of DC's Slade Wilson, aka Deathstroke. Both are master assassins who used a combination of guns and swords to destroy their enemies. Over the years, Deadpool developed into a much more distinct character, getting a snarky personality that earned him the nickname the Merc with the Mouth. Deadpool has become one of the most popular Marvel characters, receiving his own books, movies, and video games, while Deathstroke has remained comparatively obscure to mainstream audiences. So, considering that Deadpool was clearly inspired by a DC character, it's only fair that DC would then rip them off. Wayne Wilkins, aka Red Tool, is a vigilante who is romantically obsessed with Harley Quinn. He has a bit of a power tool theme, with saw blades, hammers, and a power drill being some of his go-to weapons, but between the name, his general look, and crazy personality, Red Tool and Deadpool are clearly linked. Number 3. Commander Steel and Captain America. Captain America first appeared in late 1940 in his own series published by Timely Comics, which, as I said before, would eventually evolve into Marvel. His origin has remained relatively intact across his representation in various media in the years since. Steve Rogers was a weakling who was unfit for active duty in World War II, so he volunteered for a radical experiment that gave him super strength among other powers. He became the Star-Spangled Man and fought in the war as Captain America, one of the most iconic comic book characters of all time. Somewhat less iconic is one of the DC characters he inspired, Commander Steel. First appearing in early 1978, Henry Haywood was not unfit for duty and was an enlisted soldier in the Second World War, but he was injured in a sabotage attack. He underwent an experiment that implanted mechanized steel devices into his body, granting him super strength. He started wearing a red, white, and blue Americana-themed outfit and began fighting in the Second World War. It's a pretty egregious imitation, but it's hard to be too upset about this act of copying, because honestly, aside from lists like this talking about copycat characters, when does anyone ever bring up Commander Steel? Number 2. Red Lion and Black Panther. Black Panther made his first appearance in 1966's Fantastic Four, number 52. He's really T'Challa, the ruler of the African nation of Wakanda, who uses his vibranium panther suit to defend his people and the entire world. He is a massively popular character, but he has inspired a few other characters, such as the Red Lion. Red Lion is really Matthew Bland, a ruthless dictator who has appointed himself president for life of the African nation of Berudunia, and dresses up in a red outfit that makes him look like his animal of choice. He is obviously inspired by Black Panther, but like an evil version of him. He's the Homelander to Black Panther's Superman, but beyond that, there's there's not much to the character. Number 1. Swamp Thing and Man-Thing. So, in 1971, Marvel introduced Man-Thing. He was a scientist named Ted Sallis trying to create his own version of the super soldier serum before being attacked by criminals who wanted to steal his work. To keep the formula secret, Ted injected himself with the serum before getting in a car accident that caused his car to crash into a magic swamp. The serum and the magic caused him to transform into a big green swamp monster who can control plant life. While one of Man-Thing's creators was working on the project for Marvel, his roommate, an artist working for DC, was creating a different character named Swamp Thing, who made his first appearance 1 month later. Like Man-Thing, Swamp Thing was a scientist named Alec Holland, who was working on a secret formula before getting attacked by criminals who wanted to steal it for themselves. He was doused in the formula and ended up in the nearby swamp, which absorbed his consciousness and turned him into a giant green swamp monster who can control plant life. The characters are so similar that Marvel originally planned to sue DC, but decided not to as it would set precedent, and they were worried that they would get sued by the creators of The Heap, the original comic book swamp monster who first appeared in 1942. Number 5. Sideways. Sideways is a DC Comics character who was caught in an earthquake when Challenger's Mountain came back from the dark multiverse. He fell into a chasm in the ground and through a rift, which led to the dark multiverse. This gave him the ability to teleport through dimensions, as well as super strength, agility, and reflexes. Like Spider-Man, he is a teenage hero trying to balance the various aspects of his life, but the more significant influence is clearly his costume, with the mouthless mask and shape of the large eyes. As Bully Maguire put it in Spider-Man 3, it looks very, similar. Number 4. Bug. Next up, we have our first Spider-Man inspired villain of the list. Bug is a little known DC villain who operates out of Gotham City, having his first major appearance in Batman Family number 3. Bug is a villain who specializes in surveillance, using a special suit that allows him to stick to walls. The mask is very Spider-Man-esque, and the whole sticking to walls thing while operating with a bug theme makes Spidey's influence pretty obvious. Although this character is way less known than the Marvel original, and seems more like a off-brand dollar store action figure your grandma would buy you by mistake. Number 3. Haunt. When Secret Agent Kurt Kilgore was killed by rival agents, his spirit sought out his brother, a flawed and bitter priest named Daniel, in order to try and protect his newly widowed wife from the agents who had taken his life. When the agents attacked Daniel, Kurt's ghost merged with him and Daniel became Haunt, a brutal and violent superhero with razor-sharp claws, super strength, and speed, as well as the ability to manipulate his ghostly ectoplasm, forming it into weapons, cobwebs, and tentacles. Haunt was created by superstar comic book creators Todd McFarlane and Robert Kirkman, and is a part of the Spawn universe featured in Image Comics. While story-wise and personality-wise, Haunt is very different from Spider-Man, his costume and tendency to be drawn surrounded by cobwebs makes me think Todd McFarlane missed drawing Spider-Man when he created him. Number 2. Dragonfly. Transitioning away from characters who are influenced by or simply copies of Spidey, let's talk about one that's straight up parody. During that weird period in the 2000s when we were constantly getting spoof films like Scary Movie, Epic Movie, and Meet the Spartans, one of the better entries in the series was Superhero Movie. It made fun of superhero movies from the early 2000s like the X-Men trilogy, Fantastic Four, and Batman Begins, but its main source of inspiration was clearly the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, with its lead character, Rick, being bitten by a genetically enhanced super dragonfly and becoming a bug-themed superhero. The movie is borrowing heavily from the visual style of the Raimi films and lifts several moments almost directly from the first Spider-Man movie with a comedic twist, such as Rick getting a job taking photos of the dragonfly, having his identity discovered at a Thanksgiving dinner by the villain, and tragically losing his uncle, who is played by Leslie Nielsen of Naked Gun and Airplane fame. Like most of the parody films of the era, it wasn't well received when it came out, and a lot of the jokes haven't aged well, but the film is definitely at its best when it's riffing on the classic elements of the Spider-Man story rather than making pop culture references that have aged like a fine milk. Number 1. Black Spider. Eric Needham was an addict who accidentally killed his dad while robbing a liquor store. He felt remorse for this and began hunting down and killing the various dealers in Gotham City. A wealthy benefactor gave him an advanced costume and weapons to help him in his goal, but it turned out to be a rival criminal just trying to get rid of his competition. Black Spider's lethal approach brought him into conflict with Batman, and after being defeated, Black Spider began teaming up with criminals, being more interested in revenge against the Dark Knight than fighting crime anymore. The character obviously has a similar costume, and choosing to make a character in comic books spider themed is begging for comparisons to Spider-Man, but his knockoff status was pushed to the limit when he was introduced in the Young Justice animated series, where he was full-on web-slinging and being voiced by the spectacular Spider-Man voice actor Josh Keaton. Number 10. The Blackhawks. I figured we'd start out talking about the most obscure hero group on this team. The Blackhawks first appeared in their own series published by Quality Comics in 1941. They were originally a team of ace pilots led by the mysterious Blackhawk, who fought in World War II, fighting against the Axis forces as well as more fantastical foes like King Condor and going up against strange war machines like amphibious shark planes. The tales of Blackhawk were very popular, outselling everyone but Superman at the peak of their popularity, and they were purchased by DC Comics in 1957. In the years since, they have been continuously reinvented in order to stay relevant to the modern DC universe, but it's their original iteration that we will be focusing on, because like many comic book heroes, Blackhawk took a lot of cues from pulp magazines. G8 and His Battle Aces was a pulp magazine that was published between the years 1930 and 1944. It told the story of a World War I fighter pilot named G8 who fought against the German forces alongside his team of pilots, the Battle Aces. They would fight normal military foes as well as supervillains like a voodoo priest called Hair Gun, as well as more outlandish things like rockets, wolfmen, and Martians. A lot of elements that made the Blackhawks popular are featured in G8 and His Battle Aces, but don't feel too bad, because it is also generally accepted that G8 is a blatant ripoff of a rival pulp magazine, Flying Aces, which had a similar premise, minus the more fantastical elements that both G8 and Blackhawk were known for. Number 9. The Hulk. This one falls more into the inspiration bin, but I figured it was worth talking about. The Incredible Hulk is of course Bruce Banner, a scientist who gets caught in a gamma bomb blast and is forced to transform into a giant green, or rather grey in his first appearance, monster. Stan Lee said on multiple occasions that the Hulk was just a combination of two well-known stories, one being Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and the other being Frankenstein. The Jekyll and Hyde parallel dealt with a good doctor having an experiment go wrong and transforming into a different, darker, and more impulsive aspect of himself. The Frankenstein element was of a strong, inarticulate creature being hated by society and chased and attacked, causing the creature to get angry and go on rampages. Stan basically smashed the two stories together, showing a doctor who transformed into a hulking creature. Over the years, Hulk has become more convoluted and cosmic at times, but in my opinion, the character works best when leaning into the themes and elements that inspired him. Number 8. The Fantastic Four. Next up we have Marvel's first family, the Fantastic Four. The Fantastic Four were a group of normal humans who went up into space in a spaceship and were pelted with cosmic rays, which granted them strange abilities. The group, each with complementary but different skills and abilities, decide to stick together and be heroes and scientific explorers, fighting villains and exploring alien worlds. The group was a smash hit and marked the moment when Marvel Comics actually became serious competition for DC, but they aren't wholly original. In some ways, they are similar to the friends of the pulp hero Doc Savage, known as the Fabulous Five, each of whom were individual specialists who worked together to save the day. But the Fantastic Four are even more similar to an often forgotten DC team called the Challengers of the Unknown. The Challengers of the Unknown were a team of 4 men: Ace the pilot, Red the daredevil, Rocky the brute, and Prof, the scientist of the group. When they survived a plane crash, they decided that since they were living on borrowed time, they would go on dangerous adventures together, battling villains and exploring different locations throughout space and time. The team was created by Jack Kirby, and it is widely believed that he took his core concept of the Challengers and reworked it with Stan Lee to create the Fantastic Four. Number 7. Captain Marvel. Superman is widely considered to be the first modern superhero, first appearing in 1938 and taking the world by storm. As the other comic book companies watched supes rake in money hand over fist, they decided that they needed superheroes of their own. Plenty of Superman ripoffs started showing up, but the most popular was the one appearing in Fawcett Comics, Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel was created to be Fawcett's Superman, having a similar look and a few powers in common, but what made the Captain special special was his unique origin. He was really a child named Billy Batson, who when he said the magic word Shazam would turn into a superhero. Captain Marvel became immensely popular, even outselling the Man of Steel, but this just made National Comics, the company that would eventually become DC, angry. They sued Fawcett, claiming that the Captain was infringing on their copyright, causing a lengthy legal battle that involved showing similar panels from each comic side to side. It was a long, convoluted case, but in the end, Fawcett was forced to retire Captain Marvel. So, though the two characters have a lot of differences, in the eyes of the court, Captain Marvel was a knockoff of Superman. DC would eventually purchase the rights to the Fawcett Comics characters and introduce them into the DC universe, giving Billy a second chance at life. Number 6. Zatanna and her father. One of the most underrated and slept on DC heroes is Zatanna. She is a magician who actually has magical abilities and uses them to fight both crime and supernatural threats while maintaining a career as a stage magician as her day job. People who are only passingly familiar with the character are perhaps unaware that she is actually a legacy character. Zatanna first appeared in 1964, but she is very closely following in her father's footsteps. First appearing in the same issue of Action Comics that introduced the world to Superman in 1938, Giovanni Zatara was very similar to his daughter, being a stage magician with magical powers that allowed him to fight crime on the side. But despite appearing at the same time as what many consider the first superhero, Zatara is a knockoff as well. The real first comic book superhero is a character called Mandrake the Magician. First appearing in 1934, Mandrake the Magician was, as his name would suggest, a stage magician. He has real magical powers which he uses to fight crime and protect the world from supernatural threats. He's not as well known to the general public at this point, but his influence on Zatara and Zatanna is undeniable.
Number 5. Killraiser. Honestly, I feel like the motto of Image Comics in the 90s for the most part was, what if we took this character and then made them extreme? I mean, Spawn is undeniably cool and original as a character, but a lot of the characters sometimes feel like everything that was whack about comics in the 90s and turned to 11. Look at Killraiser for instance. He is a mute character who has sharp claws that come out of his gauntlets that he uses to fight and brutally tear to shreds his enemies, but then they took it the extra mile. This is how I think the pitch meeting went for this character. Dude, what if Wolverine had more claws? You mean, dude, like claws that come out of his feet as well? Nah, dude, what if Wolverine was just claws? Dude, what do you mean? I mean, what if he was mute so we never had to develop him as a character, and instead of being a dude that just has claws, he was just a dude made of claws, coming out of every part of his body. Dude, that's awesome. Number 4. Pantha. In one of the more brazen acts of copying the editor of New Titans in the 90s, Jonathan Tierson wanted to make the Titans more like the X-Men. Rather than taking, say, the element of using a superhero story as a metaphor for prejudice or introducing the more convoluted relationships between characters of the universe to tell long, overarching stories, they decided to take this not literally and make some characters that were more like popular characters from the Marvel team, one of which was Rosabelle Mendez. Otherwise known as Pantha, or X-24, was a woman with cat-like abilities and claws who had a mysterious past she knew next to nothing about. She was subjected to experiments that granted her abilities, and she had to control her animal-like rage lest she lose control and scratch up everyone around her. Beyond that, the blue and yellow bodysuit with a yellow animal-like mask makes Pantha a pretty clear Wolverine ripoff. Of course, with the designation X-24, you might be forgiven for assuming she was a ripoff of Marvel's Laura Kinney, otherwise known as X-23, but Pantha does actually predate her by over a decade, with Pantha first appearing in the early 1991 and X-23 first appearing in late 2003. Number 3. Wolveroach. Cerebus was a comic book series that starred an aardvark named Cerebus, who works as a barbarian. The series was originally intended to be a parody of Marvel's take on the Conan the Barbarian series, but over time became an odd hodgepodge of experimental explorations of religion, gender, and politics. It had a large cast of characters, many of whom were clear parodies of iconic superheroes, but one of the more egregious ones was the Cockroach, who over the course of the story took on various superhero identities such as Moonroach, Punisher Roach. However, the one that got the most attention was Wolveroach. As you can see, he was basically just Wolverine. The character's role in the story was to be a character who had an almost religious fervor about him, intended to parody the oversaturation of Wolverine in the comics at the time. As Dave Sim put it himself in an interview for Comics Journal in 1996, when it came time to do a Roach character that had the ambience of religious fervor surrounding him, it had to be Wolverine. The fact that Marvel got so upset about me putting Wolverine on the successive covers, it's not a parody, you are now stealing the central icon of our church. Well, there you go, yes, I picked the right one. I didn't realize I was going to be putting my foot in this badly. I thought parody's parody, but you can take the chalice they called Captain America and do a parody of that. You can take the subaltern and do Moon Knight, but by God, don't you touch our Wolverine. That's the center of our church. As you can tell, Dave had very strong feelings about how popular Wolverine was and seems to also be kind of a weird dude. Number 2, Ripclaw. Cyberforce was originally intended to be a spin-off series of X-Men and X-Force, before eventually ending up at Image Comics rather than Marvel. It makes sense that a few of the characters would bear some similarities to members of the various mutant teams. The character that clearly riffs on Wolverine is Ripclaw. Actually, a good rule of thumb, if a character has the word claw in his name, there's a 70% chance that they are a Wolverine knockoff, as you can tell from all the other parts on this list. Ripclaw got his abilities after the spirits of his ancestors left him the mystical power to take on animal-like abilities, which is nice for him. I mean, all I got from my ancestors was the ability to burn in the sun and a history of heart disease. Ripclaw was then captured by the evil Cyberdata Corporation, who brainwashed him and gave him cybernetic enhancements such as razor-sharp claws. He has a tendency to snap into an animal-like rage, and he has also got a healing factor. Wolverine. He's basically Wolverine. But in at number 1 is Deadlock. Another Image Comics character, John Locke was an ordinary lowlife until he had a heart attack and died. He was taken to the shady science group known as Project Born Again, who discovered that he had a latent mutant gene, and they resurrected him, driving him completely insane in the process. He went on a rampage before being eventually taken out and resurrected again and assigned to be a member of the superhero team Bloodstrike. Just by looking at him, the Wolverine influence is pretty clear, with the fangs, the claws, and the mask that is exactly like Wolverine's, just a different color. It always baffles me when characters that are this similar to the characters they are ripping off of are created. Like, yeah, Wolverine was huge in the 90s, but if you create a character that is this similar, don't you realize that most people are just gonna be like, man, I'd rather just go buy a Wolverine comic?
Number 10, Cyberforce. Cyberforce has to be one of the biggest ripoffs of the X-Men that I've ever seen. They also are likely inspired by X-Force though, based on their team dynamic and their team name, so a little bit of like an X-Men X-Force. I would say both those things kind of come together here. Cyberforce was a group of mutants who also ended up captured by Cyberdata. Almost all, if not literally all of the team members, bear extremely strong resemblances to the X-Men mutants, which contributed to the series getting some serious flack in terms of it being kind of a copycat of Marvel's X-Men. However, it did differ in regards to some key elements. While X-Men was more targeted towards being family friendly, as many of Marvel's comics generally have been throughout the years, well, except for maybe lines like Max and to an extent I would say Ultimate, Cyberforce did not shy away from pushing the boundaries of, let's say, teen related content, and this also got them some flack among certain circles when it came to critiques of the series and the team as well. Cyberforce is a team and series that originated at Image Comics in partnership with Malibu Comics. The team was created by Mark Silvestri and would eventually move over to Top Cow Productions, which is actually his own publisher, so yeah, Cyberforce. And friends, if you love what we do here on Top 10 Nerd and you love when we talk about things that are mutant adjacent, mutant related, or just mutants in general, be sure to let us know by clicking that subscribe button. Number 9, Ripclaw. I wonder who that could be a ripoff of. If you guessed another very famous Marvel superhero mutant with claws that is known by the codename of Wolverine, you'd be right, bub. Ripclaw was one of the few members of the team to actually withstand the test of time, being one of the most famous and long-lasting even after Cyberforce began to fade. Despite his team losing prominence, Ripclaw would end up continuing to guest star, showing up in other series like Silvestri's The Darkness. He's also had his own short solo series as well for a bit. Ripclaw differs from Wolverine slightly in the fact that he has ties to the native peoples of America, with it being believed he may belong originally to the Apache tribe, although he also seems to have ties to the Navajo, the Lakota Sioux, and the Cheyenne as well. Like Wolverine, he also has experience and a background in the martial arts as well. Ripclaw possesses cybernetic claw enhancements that are similar to Marvel's Deathstrike. They're actually claws that are part of his fingernails, allowing his fingernails to extend and become razor sharp. In addition to that, he also has superhuman senses, strength, and a healing factor. Number 8. Wildcats. Wildcats is a team created by Jim Lee and Brandon Choi for Image Comics, during a period when many creators were actually working with Image because they sought to own their own properties and ideas, which the big two were pretty opposed to at that time, and I mean, honestly still are today. Wildcats actually became so popular that despite the fact that DC did not want to let creators like Jim Lee own their creations and believed that it was actually the brand and staple characters that sold comics, not the creators behind said characters and narratives, they would later approach Lee to offer a sum for ownership of the Wildcats and his Wildstorm universe, so that DC could take over the publishing of both. Wow. When it comes to this team, it's easy to see the influence of Marvel's X-Men, just even when we look at its creator, Jim Lee's history. Lee is also known for his amazing art, and despite being now heavily integrated with DC Comics, is also no stranger to Marvel, having been one of the people behind one of the most famous and iconic runs, the 90s X-Men run, which featured art by Jim Lee throughout. In Wildcats, we follow a team of superpowered beings, known as half-breeds, who are the result of aliens coming to Earth, known as the Cherubim, and mating with humans. The conflict of the comic pits the Cherubim and their offspring against the Daemonites, another alien race they have been warring with for centuries. Number 7. Grifter. Cole Cash has some distinct differences, but also a lot of distinct similarities, I would say, at the same time, to another very famous and prominent X-Man that you are likely familiar with. Gambit. Grifter is Cole Cash, a literal grifter in terms of his backstory and origin from a young age. Not only does he have a history as a con man, but while having a shady past, he also appears to genuinely want to save and help people he deems innocent. Sort of like a thief with a heart of gold. Sound like, anyone you already know? Grifter has had psionic powers in the past, but is also known for his skills as a marksman, generally wielding 2 guns or using throwing weapons in combat. So yeah, he might not have the exact power set of Gambit, he doesn't like throw cards and they explode, but the whole, throwing things element of his abilities definitely seems to fit the bill otherwise. And I mean, I feel like even his look is very Gambit-esque. Number 6. Umbrella Academy. The Umbrella Academy was definitely influenced and inspired by other similar teams that came before, like the X-Men, there's no doubt there. But there are also elements of Hellboy in there as well, which is pretty cool, especially with how oddball the comic series, its characters, and the show inspired by the comics can be. Umbrella Academy and its creation, however, was also influenced by Gerard Way's experience with the band My Chemical Romance, and his time on tour. For those of you that don't know, Gerard Way is the person that created the Umbrella Academy, so fun facts. In fact, many of the Hargreaves are actually inspired by his bandmates themselves, who of course quickly become like your family when you spend so much time together with them and, especially when you're on tour. The Umbrella Academy is the story of a group of superpowered individuals who were adopted by Sir Reginald Hargreaves after their mysterious births, which all happened on the same day all over the world. Reginald recruited them to create his own superhero team, raising them and training them to hone their skills and master them over time. However, his plan was only met with, I would say, a modicum of success, and eventually the Umbrella Academy would disband. However, years later, they would come together again after the possibly mysterious death of their adoptive father and would be forced to reunite in order to prevent the end of the world.